Welcome to Plot Twist Radio, the show where creativity, storytelling, and the unpredictable path of the creative life all collide. I'm your host, Erin Egnatz. Welcome back to Plot Twist Radio, the show where storytellers, creators, and curious minds share the moments that changed everything. Today's guest is an author, musician, and professor who's bringing two powerful worlds together: heavy metal and literature. His book, Rock of Pages, The Literary Tradition of 1980s Heavy Metal, explores how the music of the 80s didn't just shape a generation's sound, it shaped storytelling, identity, and culture too. Jesse also plays guitar in a popular 1980s hard rock tribute band. So this is someone who doesn't just study the genre, he lives it. We're talking about creativity, writing with music in the background, the energy of performance, and how the stories inside heavy metal might be deeper than the people expect. Let's get into it. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name is Jesse Kavadlo. I'm a professor of English and Humanities at Maryville University. I've published 5 books, and the most recent one of those is called Rock of Pages, The Literary Tradition of 1980s Heavy Metal.
I like to meet a fellow professor. I'm a professor of history, so I would prefer English, honestly. It's a little more interesting. History gets a little boring, but it's always fun to have a fellow professor on.
Well, history's thing is it's one damn thing after another, as opposed to narrative, which can have suspense and delight.
Exactly right. Exactly right. So, your new book, like you mentioned, Rock of Pages, what was the moment you realized heavy metal wasn't just music for you, but more of a literary tradition worth taking seriously on the page?
Yeah, I mean, I was a musician first, starting from when I was about 11 years old. I was really sure I was going to be a famous rock star. I was in bands. I wrote my own music. I learned to play the bass, the guitar, sing, keyboards. I played a lot of gigs and clubs starting at age 16. My band at the time was in Brooklyn, New York in the late 80s and early 90s. We opened for a whole bunch of bands that never quite got famous either, but some of them almost did. A lot of people from Brooklyn at that time actually did wind up, getting some record deals, although not me. And at some point when I was about 23, I thought maybe I was getting too old for this. And now in retrospect, maybe 23 was a little young to decide that I needed to retire from music. So I did get on an academic track at that point. I started a PhD program. I was teaching full time, and then my lives separated. I was really focused much more on teaching, on English, on literature, on writing. And then at some point about 12 years ago, I started playing again. I started doing gigs. About 6 years ago, I joined Top Guns, which is probably the biggest 1980s hair metal tribute band in the St. Louis and Southern Illinois area. And I started trying to think, how can I reconcile these two sides of my life? After publishing a bunch of academic books, which is sort of code for books that regular people won't read, I started thinking, what if I actually wrote a book that maybe other people wanted to read? And the thing that I really started thinking about was, what have I been working on without knowing it? Maybe for my entire life up until this point. So I had the idea to write about 80s heavy metal, but again, from the perspective of where I am now, as opposed to where I was when I was a kid and a teenager. How do we want to rethink this music now that it's 40 years later, but from a much longer literary, maybe even literary, historical, contextual lens in a way that it hasn't really been done before?
Very interesting. As you mentioned, you wear a lot of hats. You're author, musician, professor. Do you feel that those identities live in harmony, or are they sometimes competing for control of the stage?
They are sometimes competing, and this is part of what I wrote about in the introduction to the book, the way in which a lot of rock music from the very beginning, and certainly 80s heavy metal, was pretty actively opposed to school. That is, it was really presented as it's one thing or the other. School is this source of oppression for kids. It erases their individuality. It takes away all the fun of things. And rock music is about the community and individual expression and the body and not thinking about things and being unrestrained. And so it was a little hard to reconcile these two things that at first seemed to be not only different from each other, but maybe even at odds from each other. But I felt like now that I understood literature and rock music from this other perspective, maybe they didn't need to be at odds with each other as much. That so much of literature really is genuinely rebellious and really is subversive and really is getting people to think about things differently. And so much of hard rock and heavy metal is maybe even smarter, more intelligent, more erudite, more literary, words that were definitely not applied to that genre in the 1980s, than people gave it credit for. So this was about pointing out the good kind of danger in literature and maybe the intelligence of heavy metal in a way that complemented each other.
Interesting, interesting. When it comes to writing, have you noticed how difficult it could be to switch from academic writing over to more of a narrative writing? To me, that's one of my biggest obstacles.
Yeah, definitely. Academic writing has a lot of very specific conventions. The audience is different. That's one of the things I tried to balance in the new book. So it's still got lots of pages of footnotes in order to have some sort of credibility. But I didn't want it to do one of the things that sometimes happens in academic writing, which is a need for additional verification and citation in a way that gets away from the originality and the voice of the thing that you're trying to do, some version of trying to just make sure that you're taken seriously, and I felt like that wasn't what I was trying to do with this. One of the other things that happens with academic writing is as you're working on a long project, whether it's a dissertation or a book or something like that, is that you have to chunk it out in a way that maybe a chapter or a section is publishable by itself. So this way you can sort of get more mileage out of it, get a conference presentation, get a publication, get a book. And this was the first thing that I've done, and this is the 3rd book I've written, and I edited 2 other collections, so this is my 5th book. This is the first one that I really wrote that I felt was completely coherent from beginning to end, and not, "Here's a chapter that I'm gonna send out for its own thing," or, "No, this is gonna be a standalone conference presentation." This to me has a much more cohesive and organic feel to it. So in theory, somebody could do the thing that you do with academic books, which is look in the index, find the thing that you want to cite yourself, read those 5 pages, and then you're kind of done with the book. But I would really much prefer that readers begin this book at the beginning, and I guess as we learned from Alice in Wonderland, kind of go through it and end at the ending. That to me is the way to read this. Again, as opposed to other academic books where people kind of mine it or farm it a little bit for the thing that they want to understand, as opposed to treating it as a whole cohesive narrative.
Sure, yes. So you said that you wrote the book with music playing in the background. How did the sound and image kind of shape your thinking differently than writing in silence?
Yeah, I used to be a person that believed very strongly in writing in silence. I would tell my students when they would say they have writer's block or say they had trouble meeting deadlines or say they had trouble writing, I'd ask them, about their writing process, and they would frequently say something about listening to music or having screens or something in the background. And I would say, "What if you tried not doing that? See if that helps." But for this project, I did listen to music constantly. Some of it was because I was citing the lyrics, and analyzing the lyrics. Some of it was because I was talking about the videos and I wanted to watch the videos as I was writing them. But even when I wasn't doing that, I wanted to keep the energy and the mindset that was a part of the music so that it didn't have that feeling of that sometimes happens. I mean, the apocryphal phrase is, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. That was attributed to Frank Zappa. That was attributed to Elvis Costello. I don't know who said it originally, if anybody, but I didn't want it to feel that way. I didn't want it to feel like this music is so exciting and so visceral, and then the writing about it is so dull. I wanted the writing to be exciting and visceral also. And one way to try to capture that was to listen to the music as I was going, as I was writing.
Interesting. So were there particular bands or songs that unlock certain chapters or ideas for you?
I stayed pretty strongly within the genre, which is 80s heavy metal. I should specify for all the heavy metal fans that fans do not agree on what this term means. So people will definitely read the book and say that some of the groups that I'm writing about are not really heavy metal, and that's okay. The way I was thinking about this and the main playlist I used was going to YouTube, and there's a playlist of all the MTV Headbangers Ball videos that were shown during that time period, and not all of those videos were necessarily heavy metal by everybody's definition, but it was about 1,000 videos in the playlist, and that was very helpful for me to stay in the mindset. And a lot of the videos, when you look back on them now, look a little funny, they look a little dated, but I was trying to understand it within the time period as well as what it feels like to look back on it. What is clearer now in retrospect than might have been clear at the time? So I really that was really the main playlist was what was it on Hasbranger's Ball on MTV? in the 1980s and early 90s? If so, it was a great background and it was fair game for analyzing.
Makes sense to me. I love some of the '80s, playlists that they have on YouTube. I think they have
Yeah,
some of the best. So you were saying that you were in the band and you play guitar, correct?
yeah, I play guitar.
So how does performing live compare to writing about the music academically? What does the stage teach you that maybe the page can't?
The one of the things that people have frequently asked, 'cause, I work, Monday through Friday, and I perform every weekend, is, what are you thinking about when you're on stage? I'd love to know what you're thinking. I'm a pretty proficient guitar player. I play all those solos from the 1980s note for note, so that's, Van Halen and Guns N' Roses and Def Leppard, Motley Crue, and, some of these are technically challenging solos, but that was what I did when I was a teenager. I just practiced for hours and hours and hours every day until all the muscle memory was there. And so the question is, you must be thinking about a lot of things when you're on stage. And the truth is that I'm not thinking about anything when I'm on stage. I am thinking about nothing. And so that to me is the real difference between writing and being on stage. And if anything, that, what they sometimes call that flow state, that's what I was striving for in the writing. I didn't want to be thinking about it when I was writing. I wanted to just be writing. I wanted the words to just go. And I will say that I did manage to achieve that in the writing process pretty frequently. And that's where the music in the background really comes in, finding the right time of day and the right place. Although I was on a pretty strict schedule for myself to actually finish this thing, to get the right music in the background, to have the exact right amount of food and coffee. So I wasn't thinking about those things at the same time either. So as I was working on the project, achieving something like what I feel like on the stage, which is I'm not thinking about this, I'm just doing it. And it was a great feeling. And when I look back on some of the passages, and you have other writers who are your listeners, I hope they know this feeling. It's a great feeling of reading something that I wrote and thinking, I don't know how I did that. I don't even remember doing that. Who wrote that? I mean, people ask writers if they enjoy writing, and I think most writers will say they don't enjoy writing. What we enjoy is reading what we wrote. And so
Yes.
that's how I feel about this project too. I've reread it now that it's in print, and I personally enjoyed reading it, and that to me was part of the goal of the book in the first place. What I think a lot of writers think about, which is putting something into the world that you feel isn't already in the world. That if it's not there, you can do it, you can write it. And so that would be the kind of stage writing combo. Can I achieve in writing the energy and the flow that comes much more naturally to performing when there are people and lights and alcohol?
Yes. Do you think that your experience as a performer gives you a different kind of authority or maybe empathy when writing about heavy metal culture?
I definitely think so. I mean, that's one of the again, this is not a book of criticism in the sense that it's saying negative things about anybody. This is in some ways this is a fan letter in the form of a book about heavy metal and literature. But that is one of the frequent uh, challenges is that if the music critic is not also a musician, it's very easy for people to say, you're criticizing this thing, but you can't do it. So who are you to criticize it? And I actually don't believe in that. I feel like it is very legitimate to be a critic of something, even if you are not yourself a filmmaker or a musician or even an author. But I do think it helps. So I have not done, I certainly have not achieved the level of fame of any of the writers, the musicians that I'm writing about here. But I did put in a lot of time. I still know what it's like to get to a gig really early, set up, do nothing. I definitely know what it's like to carry equipment myself. um, I love the feeling of, interacting with the audience. So I've had some of that experience, that working musician experience, even if I never managed to achieve the level of fame that I dreamed of.
Right. So some people still resist the idea that heavy metal belongs in literary or academic conversations. I don't. I feel like at least my students, if I have stuff that's relatable and more interesting, they're going to learn more. So I'm not one of those people. But what do you say to skeptics who dismiss the genre as noise rather than narrative?
This is heavy metal is in some ways still, even though there are books published about it, even though there's an International Society of Metal Studies, even though it's definitely got a lot more credibility than it certainly did in the 1980s when very few people were taking it seriously in this way. It still isn't taken as seriously as even, somebody like Taylor Swift, who almost immediately, there were books written about and college courses, or Kendrick Lamar, or certainly somebody like Bob Dylan, who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2016. There are 100 books written about Bob Dylan as literature, as a towering biographical figure. So music in general, rock music, rap, current pop, is really enjoying a lot of, the benefit of being treated as worthy and intelligent, and heavy metal still isn't quite there. And in some ways, maybe that's for the best. Maybe it still manages to maintain a little bit of its outsider art status. On the other hand, I do think in the particular period that I'm talking about, which is really 1978 to 1991, that's what I'm calling the 80s, even though I realize the calendars doesn't quite agree with me on that. Um, the musicians were really responding in many ways more astutely as artists to things that were happening. So there really was a tremendous awareness of the Cold War and nuclear war at this time in this music. There was a tremendous awareness of some of the downsides of the 1980s, in a way that retrospectives on the 80s tend to celebrate the colorfulness, the pop side, this was such a fun era and such a fun decade. And if you look at the music and the lyrics at the time, that's not really what was happening. Even in the Poison song, Nothing But a Good Time, which is sort of the mantra of, party rock 80s, it's almost to me a song like, Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, or Rockin' in the Free World by Neil Young, both of whom were taken very seriously as artists, where the chorus is this big sing-along thing about one thing, but if you look at the lyrics in the verse, it's ironic. And so the verse lyrics of Nothing But a Good Time are about working and not making any money and not liking your job, and then sort of almost like lover boys working for the weekend. Even the song itself that became the mantra of the party 80s, Nothing But a Good Time, it definitely is clear that there were some things other than a good time. And that kind of social awareness is almost never taken seriously with the music of this period.
Yes, I agree. I agree. Were there any lyrics or artists even that genuinely surprised you in terms of their depth once you kinda analyze them a little bit closer?
Yeah, I would say really what I'm calling heavy metal runs the gamut through, Motley Crue, through Metallica, through Megadeth, through Slayer, but it's really the quote unquote hair bands that I think jumped out at me the most. And that's really what I was looking at a lot also, because that's really what Top Guns, my band, mostly plays. I mean, we mostly play the hair band stuff, the radio rock stuff. So something like, Bon Jovi's "Living on a Prayer," which, again, Bon Jovi not especially taken seriously in the '80s or even today, thought of as superficial. The term hairband is supposed to be a superficial thing. They're concerned about appearance and artifice and not the music or the substance. But there are a lot of things wrong with that. And one of them is even the hair itself in the 1980s. And I had a ton of hair in the 1980s. I'll share pictures with anybody who wants to see this. That was never frivolous, that was always serious. I couldn't get certain jobs because I had long hair in the 1980s. I got harassed on the streets of Brooklyn every single day because I had long hair. This was a version of declaring an allegiance, and it was something that you couldn't change out of. It wasn't like clothes that you could put on your work clothes or whatever. This was saying, "I'm a member of this subculture, and I can't change out of this." It was a commitment. It was almost the opposite of frivolity, of artifice. And something like Bon Jovi is really suggesting something, I think, pretty similar in a song like "Living on a Prayer." It is, and I analyze this pretty closely in the book, it is really an ode to failure. It is an ode to not making it, to not being successful, to the striving 1980s of we're working as hard as we can and we still don't know if we're gonna make this, but that has to be enough. And the song, has this horrible key change at the end for anybody who's ever tried to sing this thing, and it fades out. It is about the impossibility of making it, and yet we continue to strive. And to me, it's such a positive but mixed message. It is not just a party song. This is about really the challenges of things in a way that I think it deserves a lot more credit for. John Bon Jovi, Mike Tramp from White Lion, another group that wrote very serious lyrics. White Lion were writing about apartheid and the Greenpeace boat that was sank in, state-sponsored terrorism. they had excellent hair and excellent cheekbones, so nobody wanted to think that maybe they also had a message, but they did.
Interesting, and I never really thought of living on a prayer like that, but you point out some really good facts about it. I'm gonna have to listen to it again now. I'm, like, trying to sing it in my head as you're talking about it, trying to go through it, but you're right. There's more depth to it than we give it credit for. So, how did writing about the genre, that's easy for me to say, you actively perform change how you teach it?
Teach it. Yeah, I'll be teaching a rock music class next semester that I've taught every couple of years at Maryville University since 2005, 2006. It's different every time I do it because the students are really the center of it. They need to provide the music that we're analyzing. So the framework stays about the same, but we're always talking about different music because it's what they want to bring in and talk about. But I do think the performance aspect does change a little bit of how we want to think about this. On the one hand, in literature, and again, I write about this in the book, there's a tendency to want to separate the artist and the author from the music. And this is a very good impulse. This is the famous Roland Barthes Death of the Author. This is the Michel Foucault What is an Author? The idea that we shouldn't be bound to the author's life or intentions because that limits our reading of things. And I think that's very valuable. The idea is that that empowers the reader and that empowers the listener. It's not just about what the author thinks, it's what the viewer, listener, reader gets out of it. And that's a great message for students who, might feel like, what do I have to say about this thing? And the answer is you have a lot to say about it. On the other hand, in working on this, just the fact that so many musicians have died by, drug overdose, by suicide, and all these other things makes me want to reconsider that problem a little bit. And that was something that students really pointed out to me years ago as I was teaching this course. Somebody like Elvis Presley, who, every night went on stage and said, I'm so lonely I could die. And then he did at age 42, which I forgot until I was working on this book. I'm like, 42 was old, Elvis? All the rock stars who are on tour now are way older than that. And so in terms of teaching this, it's a nice balance between the music, the social, or back to you, historical context, and the artists themselves. And these are all things that we can consider as opposed to deciding we're going to take one literary or philosophical framework on this thing.
Interesting, yeah. So, if Rock of Pages were a mixtape, what song would open it?
That's a really good question. Because of the way it's written, it would have to be Metallica's Master of Puppets, because the preface does talk about Stranger Things and the use of the character Eddie Munson and Metallica as a way of rethinking the 1980s. So I thought that was a nice way in, especially if some of the readers didn't get to experience the 1980s themselves personally because they weren't there. Stranger Things is embarking on a project that overlaps with what I'm doing, which is it's not from the 1980s, and it's not even exactly about the 1980s. It's about the art of the 1980s. It's about how do we rethink what this looked like then. And so Master of Puppets was a great way of thinking about this. On the show on Stranger Things, if you remember the scene, the lyrics are almost repurposed to be about the actual fight that the characters are having against this monster who controls people's minds. And the lyrics absolutely fit. And the song is incorporated into the storyline too, about this way of sort of fighting against oppressive and manipulating forces. Of course, in the book, I talk about that in its own context. In the 80s, it was clearly about that, but those oppressive forces were very different. That the song arguably is using a genuine literary technique of personification, of anthropomorphication to think about drugs and drug addiction, or about, again, some of the other oppressive forces like the Parents Music Resource Center that wanted to put labels on heavy metal records in the 1980s. So that to me is a nice example of we can think about this music and analyze it and come to very different interpretations depending on the framework that we want to take. Is it about an actual mind controlling monster? Works. Is it about drugs? Still works. Is it about parents who want to control what people, kids are allowed to listen to? Still works.
Yes, that makes perfect sense. I love that. My daughter has had me watching Stranger Things. We've been binge watching. She's obsessed with the '80s. I drug her to a Duran Duran concert last year. They're my favorite band. So now
I saw
she's
Duran
all
Duran in
'80s.
Chicago about 4 years ago. Same, they don't come through St. Louis. You probably did you have to drive to get to Duran Duran?
I did, and I live near Chicago, but
Okay.
they weren't here, so I had to go to Pennsylvania to see them. So they need to come back.
Yeah, they're rich enough that they can pick and choose where they wanna go. They don't have to go everywhere anymore.
But I have enjoyed this. I have loved talking to you. Where can the listeners find you?
I am the only person, as far as I know, in the world with my name, Jesse Kavadlo. If anybody looks me up, you'll find my webpage, you'll find my email address. I love hearing from people. It would not be in a position if anybody just directly wrote to me. You can find Rock of Pages on the Bloomsbury website. It's on Amazon, it's on Barnes and Noble. I would love for people to check it out. If you're having trouble getting a copy of it, you can ask your local library to please purchase a copy of it for you. See if that works. And I'm happy to talk to anybody who's interested in any of the things we talked about today.
Well, thank you so much. I will make sure that I have all of your socials linked and in the description, but thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much, Erin.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
Thanks. Bye. Jesse, this has been such a fun and fascinating conversation. Thank you for bringing your brain and your rock and roll heart to the show. If you want to check out Jesse's work, his book, Rock of Pages The Literary Tradition of 1980s Heavy Metal, came out December 11th. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow music lover or creative who lives with a soundtrack in their head. I'm your host, Erin, and this has been Plot Twist Radio. Until next time, keep creating, keep questioning, and keep embracing the plot twist.